something in a childhood that has happened, or even someone that has told you something which you took to be the gospel, the truth. And now, based on that interpretation, you are now making decisions based on that one belief or based on that one conditioning. You're making decisions throughout your whole life.
Do you know what is the biggest barrier between you and your dreams? It's not money or support or your skills. It is your belief in yourself. Welcome to Coaches on the Couch, the place where experts share their journey and inspire you to take action. My name is Pratishtha Bhalla and I will be your host for the show. Today we have with us Vanja Beric, a registered counsellor in Australia. Coming from a war-torn country as a refugee to Australia about 11 years ago, she has experienced hardship, abuse, and had very limiting beliefs. She had survived through constant fears and lack of self-worth. And today she is an entrepreneur who wants to empower women to heal their past and build their self-belief. Today she will be sharing with us her journey and some practical ways to get rid of your past and build unshakable self-belief. So make sure you stay with us till the end and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it till now, so that you don't miss the updates. A very warm welcome, Vanja, to Coaches on the Couch.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Vanja. Vanja, you mentioned you are from a refugee. You are a refugee and from a war-torn country. You moved to Australia. So let's start with the story. What happened?
Yes, sure. So I'm originally from what used to be known as Yugoslavia. It's no longer that. And I was 5 when the war started, and it was, I guess it was people imagine it would be, because when I talk about this a lot, people kind of, for people that haven't gone through it, they give me their side of what they think it would be, and it was a lot worse than that. In saying that, I was only 5, so my parents at the time did the best they could to shield us. It was the 3 of us. I have 2 siblings, and they really, they did the best they could to shield us. And throughout that whole experience, I really didn't feel like there was something missing. I didn't see the effects of it. I wasn't aware at all. And throughout, I guess, our fight to survive and things like that went on for about 5 years, I experienced abuse. And again, especially someone who experiences abuse as a child, you don't really understand what's happening. And it wasn't until I was in my teenage years, so now I'm in Australia by this point. I was 11 when we moved to Australia. So I was in Australia at this point, and far away from everything that has happened, that I guess everything hit, and I started experiencing side effects from all that trauma. And it just went on worse and worse as time went on. And it was, I noticed that I wasn't on the same level playing field as everyone else. People were getting on with their lives, and I guess, of course, I was as well in a way, but I was always struggling with what happened, always on my mind, and in nightmares, and, lack of sleep, lack of concentration, and all those side effects of trauma. And it wasn't in my early 20s that I was like, there's something wrong here. It's not just, I don't know, whatever I thought it was. It's not that. And I also had this dream and hope. And I guess a bit of, I don't know, society and the media was, I would like to put that on them, was, once I get married and once I have my own kids, all of this would go away. This dream of, being rescued by Prince Charming. And when I realized that wasn't going to happen, I thought, okay, I need to do something about it. And I sought counseling, and I saw how much it changed my life. And that was when it kind of I was like, I really need to do this for other people.
Vanya, as you are mentioning from the first person view of how it was living life like that in that country, and you face that abuse. Um, Childhood trauma can be something which is really difficult to just forget and get over it. As you know that, because we don't have logic. At the age of 5, you did, as you said, you didn't know what was happening to you.
Yes.
So at that time, what was happening? Were you in that trauma? You were reacting, you were angry all the time. What was happening when you didn't know what was happening to you, but you were having those kind of experiences?
Um, at the time, I guess I wasn't particularly angry. I think I was very confused. I was confused why we have to move again, why, in the places that we moved to. So you would usually try and move where the war has been. So to try and escape it. So the idea was, if they've, if there was fighting on that in that place and the borders were settled. So, what people usually fight for is land. So the borders were settled. Okay, so chances are, the front line, or I guess the attack, wouldn't come back. It would keep going to keep settling, the borders further down. So when we would move to places, you would see destroyed buildings, just bullet holes everywhere. We weren't allowed, as kids, we weren't allowed to go outside of I guess, outside of your parents' side or outside of the main area because of landmines and things like that. And, those things were confusing as to like, well, why am I not allowed? Like 2 months ago, before this whole thing started, I was allowed. Why am I not allowed today? What's the difference? Um, so those kind of things, those were the questions that I had in my head. And again, for anyone who goes through abuse, it was confusion in terms of, I guess, what did I do wrong? But it was also confusion in terms of how to act, because if it happens from someone that is a family member or, close to the family, how do I act now? Because, and again, this is just, as you said, lack of development in a child's brain. You still want that person close because you still love that person, and there's conditioning that they're family and you're not meant to turn on them, but they have hurt you. So how, what do you, how do you balance the two?
Yeah, and it can, as you said, you had really limiting beliefs about yourself. So when you realized as a teenager what had happened to you, uh, what was that journey like, and how, did you communicate with someone close to you what had happened? Did you resort it to your friends, or you directly met that counselor and started your recovery journey? How did it started?
I didn't actually share what had happened with my family till I was in my 30s and well, way, way past it. Um, and I think, again, a lot of people who've gone through trauma experience this, that you don't necessarily. So I think in my teenage years, trying to think back now, if someone had asked me what was causing this, I honestly would have said, I don't know, because a lot of times our brain blocks the memory because it feels it's too heavy and too hard to process at the time. So as a way to protect itself, it blocks that memory, but the body remembers, and it's a very common thing in trauma where you have the side effects, but you don't really understand why, or you don't really know why. And a lot of times, even through my clients, I hear this when they start talking, in their 20s, and they're like, I suddenly remember this thing happening when I was a child, and I have never, ever remembered it before. And it's your brain blocking the memory in a hope to preserve itself, but the body remembers, so you have the reactions of being really frightened, and I had the reactions of nightmares, lack of concentration and things like that. but none of it, I had no idea why, you know. So I just thought it was just me. There was something wrong with me. And it wasn't until I went through therapy and then the therapist explained these are all the side effects of trauma. I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense then. Because as I started working through them, all of those things, you know, they decreased until the point of now where they stopped. Obviously, I can just talk about it without having any sort of deep emotions.
That's a great point you mentioned, that now you can talk about it without those emotions. So you remember exactly what had happened, but the emotions are not there as strong as they were. So many people who are undergoing trauma, who are currently facing some kind of trauma, they are PTSD or some kind of issues, they feel that it can never heal. How can I forget? I cannot forget that memory. But you mentioned about not having that emotion, and you also mentioned earlier about forgetting how to forget the past. So how can um, they start their journey of forgetting these painful memories?
Yeah. So as you said perfectly, it's not about forgetting because it's a part of something that has happened, and it's forgetting it won't do anything because the body is so the chemical reactions, the cells in our body still remember. So it's about so creating peace and about healing what has happened when, especially when we experience trauma in childhood. So we have the left and the right side of the brain, and as we develop, there's these neurons that fire and connect the two together, and this is, you know, through development as a child develops. If we had traumatic experiences, and now people usually, you know, when I say trauma, people usually associate, you know, has sexual abuse, war, you know, like really heavy trauma, but it's usually, you know, it could be something like being lost in a shopping mall for 5 minutes is very traumatic for a child because, and especially if it's a very young age, because they don't know if it's 5 minutes or it's forever. So, you know, something like this can have that development on the brain where those neurons don't fire for, you know, for that moment, and then it has side effects on a person. So, um, so again, this is then where our reactions come from, and our, you know, where the side effects start to grow because we're only sort of functioning on either one side of the brain, so very analytical or very, very emotional. And so this is why we're like, I want to forget because, you know, I want to look at a situation and not be reminded of what has happened and not react from it, you know, for a person who has had, let's say, a very loud parent and a very yelly, you know, a parent that's, you know, very much yells, they may have this sort of the startled reaction, you know, so when you just touch them, they're like, ah, constantly, you know, they're very easy to scare. And again, that's something they may not remember necessarily, but their body remembers. So it's the body that actually has the reaction. You know, it's not enough, you know, they don't stop and think, oh, wait, I was scared of, you know, none of that happens. So being able to, and those neurons that never fired or that never connected the two brains together, as you start to heal and as you start working through whatever has happened, because they're constantly refiring and rewiring, our brains are constantly rewiring now. So it can happen in adulthood, it can happen at any age. And that's the beautiful thing. And this is where, you know, I can talk about this now without having any deep emotions attached to it. But, you know, if you'd have asked me 10 years ago, you wouldn't have understood me because I would have been bawling my eyes out, you know, in tears. And it's, you know, being able to use both sides of your brain to process a situation, realize that you're not in that situation, that you're not a child anymore, that you can defend yourself, you know. So and this is then where we can talk about these things, we can have a conversation, we can be in, because I was very much afraid of being in a room with men. So being alone in a room with men, I used to have PTSD from that. So now I can be, and it has no issues because I've healed my trauma. And again, I feel like, you know, my brains are connected now, for lack of a better word, and I'm able to process any type of information with both sides of my brain, so figuring out the emotional and the analytical.
That's interesting. So, what can one do to make these connections? What did you do?
Yeah. So it's about really, so depending on how deep is your trauma, if you feel like you need to go talk to someone, absolutely. I mean, especially nowadays, there's people like myself that are online. There's probably people in wherever you are. So it can stay, there is so much information out there. If people, it's about having that awareness of what is going on in your head and where your emotions, reactions are coming from. And what you said in the beginning was, it's about building that self-belief as well, because when we experience something traumatic, which 99% of the population has, to some degree, we lose the trust in ourselves and we lose the ability in ourselves. And so we kind of, we allow the world to dictate how we feel and what we believe in. So it's about taking that ownership of what is going on inside, creating that awareness of what is going on inside. That is, I think, half of the way there. And then dealing with whatever information you found out, that, so then it takes away the power, because the power is in you not knowing what's happening. Because as I said, in my situation, where I was afraid of being alone in a room with men, now they were absolutely harmless men, when I was an adult. And on top of, like, I would have been an old man that I very easily could have defeated from if I needed to, but it wasn't in my head. I wasn't a 20-something-year-old or 19-something-year-old. I was 5, or I was 6, or I was 7, whatever it was, so creating that awareness of, wait a minute, I am 20-something. I can, there is plenty of ways, or I can just walk away, or, so and a lot of times we're fearful of taking any action because, again, it means consequences to us. So having an understanding of what that means to us, and really deep diving and understanding yourself and creating that knowledge about yourself, which then builds your self-belief, which you can then take action into wherever direction you want to go.
Anya, but this self-belief, we sometimes don't even realize that we don't have that self-belief in ourselves. We blame the environment. Oh, because of them, we are not doing it. We are not taking action in our life. So how can one understand if it is a self-belief problem, or is it actually the world problem? Like the world is plotting against us?
If we are blaming, or not blaming, or if we are shifting responsibility from us onto other people, we are at mercy to other people. So if they're feeling good and they give us good energy and they give us good communication, then I feel good. If they're not feeling great, then I'm not going to feel great. So that's the number one, and I guess the most important thing for us to remember is, when we are blaming the world, or again shifting responsibility onto the world is then in charge, and we're just doing as we're told. And that's where that, but once we build that self-belief, and once we get really rooted in ourselves and being okay with making mistakes and being okay with the messiness of life and failing, or whatever that is, then people can try and influence us. People can bring, come to us with a bad attitude, and it's not something that can affect us, or even if it does, it's not something that affects us long term. It may affect us in that moment, and again, that might be something like, oh, okay, now let me deal with that. But it's not something that then we carry on, And a lot of times we do, if you're starting out something, you usually sort of, how much you believe in yourself is very evident if you're starting out in something that you've never done before. And you know that the moment that someone even like gives you an inkling of negativity, even if they don't mean it, or you just interpret it, it's very easy to stop what you're doing. It's a very easy to, run away from it. And then that's where that self-belief comes from. And it comes from childhood. And this is why healing your past is so important, because understanding of what conditioning do you have, what beliefs do you have, what patterns have you repeated throughout your life, that is where you've lost your self-belief. Because, as a child, if you look at a toddler, I mean, they think they can do anything. They have very little fear, and they have a very little self-doubt. If they want to speak, they'll speak. They have no problem showing emotion, and it's us, as parents and as society that, sort of gets rid of all that and shapes them into a human being that fits into society. But unfortunately, that then takes away their independence, their free thinking. And you can have free thinking as long as it's in a box, So, and that's where a lot of us feel like is we are in a box.
Yes, so sometimes that box is designed by us only, as you were saying.
Yeah. And it could be, it might have been in childhood designed by other people, but we're the one maintaining it.
Maintaining it, yeah.
Yes, and in adulthood, we're the one that are keeping the walls safe when we should be tearing it down.
Yeah, because as a child, if we have learned this, that this is our safe space, we will not be criticized. And, if somebody is with anxiety, OCD, or PTSD, getting that criticism, facing that criticism, I think it is a very, very big fear.
Yes, yeah.
So maintaining these walls becomes all the more necessary, that, oh, I am safe now, nobody is criticizing me. That factor of feeling good is in itself very healing. Okay, I am safe here, nobody is criticizing me.
100%. We learn to adapt to our environment, especially as children. It's why, they can be, we won't mold them so easily, because if you look at, say a 5-6-year-old, you look at her or him, and they're a replica of their parents. It's, because they can be molded so easily because they have the freedom, and we put walls around them. And as you say, those walls, that ego, or whatever you want to call it, whatever name you want to put on it, is designed to protect us. It's designed to keep us quiet because, our parents don't want us to talk, or the teacher doesn't want us to talk, or, you get bullied in school for talking differently or something like that. So it's absolutely designed to keep us safe. And then we also take that design into adulthood, thinking this is the way that it keeps us safe. And then we go through this feeling of, I don't know who I am. I need to find myself. And we start creating excuses of, as you said, I can't do that because I don't have money. I don't have support. I don't have a partner. I keep picking the wrong partners, and it's all around, you'll see a pattern, it's all around the same thing. And it's that lack of belief, and trying to live a life that someone else thinks you should live. And it's very hard to live up to someone else's expectations, because again, you are at mercy of their mood or their attitude or their beliefs. And we don't, and that's when we start then projecting and blaming other people.
So Vanya, when someone comes to you with so many boxes and so many limiting beliefs, what is the first step you do with them, so that to just help them out, to just help them move?
Yeah. So one of the easiest things, if they go, I want to change my job. I'm not happy with my marriage. My parents are driving me crazy. So they come with 10 things, and you're like, ah. So the thing that I ask them first, and that I would ask your audience to look at, is what is the thing that drives you insane, I want to say. So what is the thing that bothers you the most in this moment? Is it your relationship? Is it work? Is it kids? Is it whatever? Now, when you focus on that one thing, okay, so I'm just going to work on one thing at a time. What is a pattern here? So what have you've been here before? So when you're feeling that overwhelmed, or you're feeling like, really down in the trenches and you can't handle life anymore, just everything's too much, you've been here before. So when have you, and I know that you've experienced this before, when have you done it before? When have you experienced? So start realizing those patterns, because we do repeat patterns throughout our life based on the box that we were put in the childhood, or it's called conditioning, but I call it the box. So having an understanding of that, and you can usually see it, if you're looking at something like a marriage, or even a partnership or something like that, you can usually look at your person you're with now, then look at the person you were before. What are some of the similarities that they have? What are some, they may be a completely different person, but you still feel the same. Eventually you get to, feeling the same feeling. Let's examine that. Let's really examine what you're feeling. Start putting words to that feeling. So it's not just anger. What's beneath the anger? What are you afraid of happening? What are so once you start digging deep and keep asking the questions, why am I feeling like this? Why do I feel like I need to act this way? Where did this first come from? Why not why is this happening to me? So we're going through the process without judgment, and it's just an exploration. So imagine, that if you want an architect trying to find the bone, you're not going, why isn't this in here? You're just slowly and calmly digging deeper and deeper until you find the core problem. And it's usually, something in a childhood that has happened, or even someone that has told you something which you took to be the gospel, the truth. And now, based on that interpretation, you are now making decisions based on that one belief, or based on that one conditioning. You're making decisions throughout your whole life, and you're now understanding that, wait, this actually may not be serving me as much as it did when I was a child. So understanding your patterns and asking the questions of why. This is where you would start. And I think that in itself is half the work, because once you start with that, it feels liberating. It feels, you have those aha moments and they feel amazing. And you're like, okay, how, what's next, kind of thing.
So we basically start with what is the first feeling we are having, the first thing that is causing you trouble, and we dig deep to find the patterns. And then once we acknowledge the patterns, then we change those patterns. Is it?
Yeah. So understanding the patterns and thinking about, okay, so what is the actual, what is the belief that serves me now? So having a belief. So for myself, I had a belief of money is the root of all evil, especially living in a country that was communist before the war. Anyone that was rich was either a criminal or done something wrong to have any kind of money. So coming to Australia and still having that belief, I was self-sabotaging myself constantly in terms of money, because I had that belief. I wanted to build my wealth, but at the same time, I had the belief that if I did that, I was a bad person. So of course I'm going to sabotage myself, because the last thing I want to be is a bad person. So, and then kind of understanding that. So had a first understanding of, or awareness, I'm actually doing that. I'm sabotaging myself. I come to a certain point where I believe, okay, so it's not like I am poor, but I'm not rich, like, what I think is the ceiling. and then I will choose decisions that I know will be bad for me financially, or I'll choose something that will be, so it's that self-sabotage. So creating awareness in terms of that, what am I doing? Okay, so now I created awareness. I'm now understanding where this belief came from. Now, what do I want to replace it with? Well, at the time, I had no education in terms of money. So I then had to go educate myself. So, all right, so if money's not the root of all evil, what is it then? So having educating myself through books, through webinars, courses, whatever it was, listening to people, understanding what it is, and then creating beliefs that suit me. And again, now that I have an awareness of, I do have beliefs, I can keep changing them as I need to. So again, it's nothing solidified. It's just, for now, works for me. This is what sounds plausible and believable. And then when I get to a certain point, I may change them again, and that's okay.
It's very interesting, Vanya, because a lot of us have these money blocks, and we want to be rich, but then all our actions are against being rich.
Yes, exactly.
As you mentioned very nicely, and about beliefs also. So many times we don't even realize our beliefs, but you mentioned it beautifully that how you are not solidifying any of your belief now. You are keeping it more fluid so that you can use it according to yourself. Like
Yes.
your need at that time.
Yes, I always say the example because again, I've realized that in myself, if I had the magic wand 10 years ago and I could have made myself or given myself whatever I wanted, I wouldn't have chosen this life because I couldn't have imagined it 10 years ago. But I love this life. I love what I'm doing. I love the space that I'm doing it in. So, oftentimes I try so hard to plan for the future, plan for the next 50 years, but you don't want to plan with the brain that you have now, with the knowledge that you have now for the next 50 years. You want to plan it, 2-3 years ahead, and that's as far as you should go in terms of your planning, because in 2-3 years time, again, you will accumulate so much knowledge that you're like, I don't want to do, whatever I've said I wanted to do, I don't want to do that anymore. Now I want to take it to that next level.
So yeah, I think that's very relevant because 4 years plan, what I wrote about my goals, it's very, very different to what I'm at.
Yes, tell me about it. And let me ask you then, would you have, if you had the choice now, would you want to do what you're doing now, or would you want to do the plans that you had written down?
I think I would still prefer what I'm doing now and see how those plans are realized.
Yes, and that's exactly it. So being okay, and this is what, again, self-belief is about, is just being okay in the moment and being okay with what life throws at us. And this is where this is where that healing comes in, and this is why it's so important to work on our past, and so we can talk about whatever has happened to us without emotion, because I'm just okay with whatever life throws at me. And it doesn't mean that, like if something terrible happened, if someone died or something like that I wouldn't be affected. Of course I would. But it's also knowing that I will go through the grieving process, and then I will cut, and I'll still be okay after that. And I'll still be okay after that. So it's that whatever happens in life, that you can handle it. And once you really have that understanding, you will be so powerful, because people won't affect you, or people's moods, people's choices, words won't affect you as much. They may still affect you, to an extent, and then again, that's another layer you need to work on. And you just be grounded in yourself, in your goals, in whatever it is you want to do, in whatever it is you want to achieve. And it's a beautiful, liberating place to be, because it's without constrictions, and all of us, I think, no matter where you're from, you feel constricted in some way.
We all have to work on our self-belief and that small voice which is telling us, not now. Thank you so much, Vanya, for this amazing insights and sharing with us with all your vulnerability, whatever happened with you. That takes a lot of courage and a lot of healing.
Thank
Because
you.
if you have not healed, you would not have been here. And that is the purpose of Coaches on the Couch, to bring in experts who have been through that journey. So they are not sharing with you the theory. Of course, theory and techniques and everything is important, but they have lived through it and they know the pain, but they are also living another life now. If they can do it, so can you.
Absolutely. There's really like, and again, a lot of times I hear that as well, for people who have, I guess, done it in whatever aspect, there is something special about them. There is, they had a hand in life or something like that. I can guarantee you there's nothing special about me. Like really, I am just me with all my mistakes. I still make mistakes. I still yell. I still get scared. Like there's nothing special about me. There's nothing special about really anyone out there, which might be hard for some people to hear. We're all just human. And it's really not about even thinking about how can I heal everything. It's how can I heal just this little bit. And once I've done that, then let me focus on the next bit. So in whatever situation you're in whatever capacity you're in, thinking about what you can heal in this moment right now, as soon as you finish listening to this, okay, so what can I start healing? That one little thing, start with that and see how amazing that feels. And then decide if you want to keep going, but I can guarantee you will.
I think that's a golden nugget of today's session. Like, start with the one thing you want to heal instead of focusing on all the things. Because once we start digging, there can be more things, there can be so many things, and we feel overwhelmed and think that, oh, my life is so special. Only I know what I'm going through, and nobody can heal me. Instead of that, just pick up a small piece and start healing. Thank you so much, Vanja, for this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate this whatever conversation we had today. I hope you, as the audience, are also were also inspired by what Vanya shared. If you were inspired, if something touched you as well, write in the comment box so that we know that you were listening, you were enjoying. And if you have any questions, please feel free to share it in the comment section, and we will try to answer you. And I'll share all the details where you can contact Vanya. You can use those links and just get in contact with her if you are someone who is actually looking for some support in your healing. She is a certified counselor, so feel free to just get in touch. So thank you so much. I'll meet you next week with another amazing expert. Till then, keep smiling and keep shining. It's me, Pratishtha.